Clemson closed a 21-point gap to a touchdown early in the fourth quarter, but fifth-seeded Texas fended off two late scoring opportunities to secure a 38-24 victory.
They can get a first down without getting a touchdown. Klubnik on the move, fires, end zone wide open. T.J. Moore, touchdown Clemson.
Quarterback Cade Klubnik, playing in his hometown, passed for 336 yards and 3 touchdowns, while freshman wide receiver T.J. Moore set career highs with 9 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown.
Ewers on 2nd and 16. Deflected and picked off. Intercepted by R.J. Mickens. And Mickens takes it into the end zone. A pick six.
Safety R.J. Mickens intercepted a pass from his high school teammate Quinn Ewers. However, the Tigers were unable to contain Texas's rushing attack as the Longhorns head to the second round, ending Clemson's 2024 campaign.
Drones goes right back the same way. Back shoulder fade, picked off, intercepted from Hampton.
How did he bring this in? Then he just sticks his arm out and corrals it in. It's unbelievable.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 17 of the Nachos and Analysis College Football Show. I'm Drew Archer, and as always, I'm joined by Matthew Johnson. How's it going, Matthew?
What's going on? It's good. Obviously, I talked about it previously, but that we missed last week. Drew was out of the country. I was moving, so new look here. And I'll go ahead and apologize. I have to leave this door open because where I'm staying, the cat's litter box is in this room, so they need to be able to come in and out. You might get an appearance from Eve or Alaska during our recording, but also I'm allergic to cats, so my eyes might be a little puffy. I'm a little sniffly, so bear with me on that. But Drew, how was your travels? How'd you find the first round of the playoffs?
My travels were fun. I will say, since coming back into the country from being somewhere warm, I have now become sick, so I apologize for my voice and possible hacking. And I did get the worst food poisoning I've ever had in my life while I was gone. So thankfully, it only took me down for a day. I bounced back, but got back in time to watch the first round of the college football playoff. And there's been lots of chatter about who deserved to be in and who didn't deserve to be in after some of these results in week one.
I mean, we can start off with that first game, that Friday night game, the Indiana-Notre Dame game. This was the closest game of the first round, and it is the only game that really has evidence that a 12-team playoff was necessary to begin with, because as we go through these, you'll see that all of these were blowouts. So it'd be interesting to see how college football changes moving forward, but I had a good time watching the 12-team playoff. I was really excited for that Friday night game and just to spend Saturday watching all the games, so I was excited about it. I think even though the games weren't necessarily close, I enjoyed the experience of getting, some new matchups. Clemson never played Texas before. Indiana Notre Dame hasn't played in 30 years. SMU Penn State, I don't think I'd ever played. So, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I like the different matchups because, with the 14 playoff, everybody was getting fatigued. It was Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia. It was the same teams. Occasionally you get some different folks in there, but some cool and unique matchups. Didn't necessarily translate to the best of games, but I'm a big fan of having these games on campus, getting those home playoff environments. That's one thing that college football does better than the NFL is just the overall environment of home games, and that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I agree. And as we go through these games, you'll notice that home teams had a huge advantage in the first round because none of them lost and all of them won by 2 possessions or more. So did you get the chance to watch any of these, or were you traveling for?
The only one I didn't get to watch was Indiana Notre Dame. When we got back into the country and once we found out that Clemson was in the playoff, we were like, well, we can't miss that. So in our travels back, we stopped in Savannah. We got a hotel room and spent Saturday watching all of these games. We watched the SMU Penn State game on a phone in the car, but we're able to sit down in front of a TV and watch the others. That Indiana Notre Dame game, Notre Dame wins that one 27-17, and that result is closer just because of a late push there by Indiana towards the end of the game.
Yeah, and Notre Dame looking like they have a really good chance to make a run here, although those 2 teams on the bottom of the bracket, they have the toughest matchups coming up against Oregon and Georgia. So it probably would have been better for Notre Dame to be in a Texas position where You get Arizona State next, but also Clemson might have had a better chance of beating Notre Dame than Texas.
Yeah. I was really hoping Clemson would get a win because I'm going to be in Nashville next week, and it's working out that I'm coming home the day of that Chick-fil-A game and in Atlanta, and I have to drive through Atlanta to get back. So I was kind of hoping that I could have swung by and watched that game, but I've scratched that off the list there.
Yeah, that would have been nice. My dad requested tickets to the one in Atlanta just in case Clemson did win, but obviously that didn't happen. But before we get to that, SMU Penn State, any thoughts on that one? I mean, it was a blowout.
Jennings was the reason for a lot of SMU's success this year. He did not have a good first half in that game.
He was the reason for them having a horrible showing this game, because I think I counted through the game 3 sacks, maybe 4, 2 pick sixes in the first quarter that put Penn State up 14-0, and then another interception in the first half on the goal line when SMU is about to score and cut it to 1 score. So Kevin Jennings, great season, not a great way to end it. He's young though, isn't he? He's going to be back, right? Yeah, he is young. He's only a sophomore this year, so I don't think he's going to hit the transfer portal either. So SMU probably going to improve next season even.
Yeah, I think SMU probably has enough NIL money to keep him there in Dallas. As far as the most lopsided games, that and the one we're going to get to next were pretty lopsided. I was kind of interested to see how the weather would affect this game because, I mean, I know the ACC championship was cold. They performed well there, especially in the second half with that late push against Clemson, but it was much colder there in Pennsylvania this past weekend.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of an effect that was. It didn't seem like Kevin Jennings was like just seeing the game very well. I don't know if it had to do with the weather or just the big time environment that Penn State had on Saturdays. There was a couple plays where he just threw it almost directly to a linebacker, like sitting underneath his receiver. It's like he didn't even see them. So like I don't think he was seeing the game very well. But yeah, you mentioned the Tennessee-Ohio State one. Really not very interesting. I stopped watching pretty early once I saw that it was getting out of hand.
Yeah, I ended up falling asleep before this game ended. This is the one game that I thought was going to be the most competitive game. It was the one I was looking to the most outside of the Clemson game. And the fact that so many Tennessee fans made the trip up. Looking at the crowd there was a lot of orange in that stadium, and a lot of them left, I'd imagine, early and very disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Ohio State, I think this was a big showing for them because I didn't have like a ton of faith in Tennessee going into this playoff run. But yeah, like I said, home teams dominated, and this one, Ohio State just really ran away with it at the end too.
All right, before we get into the Clemson-Texas matchup, we have to shout out our loyal sponsor, and that is Pump Monkey Septic Service, owned and operated by Clemson alumni Alan Powell. Does great work, honest work. Give him a call at 864-710-2211. It's the holiday season. We've been talking about it the last month or so. The last thing you want is septic tank issues when you have a house full of people. So give Alan Powell a call at 864-710-2211. Clemson alumni servicing the upstate of South Carolina. They're also on Facebook and Instagram. So reach out for all your septic tank needs. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey. All right, shall we talk about this Clemson game?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe you should just run through the stats first. And
So the Tigers finished the 2024 season 10-4, marking their 20th season with 10 or more wins in program history. Clemson made its 7th college football playoff appearance, one of only 2 teams to achieve this feat since the format's inception in 2014. Tigers only second to Alabama. With the win in the ACC championship game, Clemson extended its 14-year streak of postseason victories, the longest in FBS history. One thing of note that I saw someone, a Carolina fan, point out on Twitter, Clemson did not win a bowl game this year.
that is true, I guess. We did get that postseason win at least.
Yeah. Clemson gained 412 total yards, including 336 passing yards, the most allowed by Texas's defense this season. Cade threw, as I said, for 336 yards, his 4th 300-yard game of the season and his 2nd in postseason play. Klubnik also finished the season with 36 touchdown passes, tying for the record of 2nd most in a single season in Clemson history. Freshman wide receiver T.J. Moore set career highs with 9 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown, marking his first 100-yard game. Receiver Antonio Williams tied for the 6th most touchdown receptions in a season at Clemson with 11. Defensive tackle Trey Williams recorded his first multi-sack game of his career, finishing with 2 sacks against Texas Saturday afternoon. And place kicker Nolan Hooser recorded 113 points this season, ranking tied for 6th in school history for points in a single season. It's something else that I kind of wondered out loud about on our last episode with Clemson facing SMU and Texas for the first time, both 2 schools from the state of Texas. With December games against SMU and Texas, Clemson played multiple games against teams from Texas in a single season for the first time in school history. So that kind of answers that question from a couple of weeks ago. What are your thoughts looking back on this playoff loss to Texas?
Well, I think the stats really tell the story here. I was impressed with the way the offense came out and performed. I think the game plan was really good too. And this was against a really good defense. Like you said, this was the most passing yards Texas gave up in the season all year. So Cade played amazing. Still had a lot of incompletions, but I think towards the end of the game, you're in passing situations, having to force passes pretty much. Like you can't rely on the run game. So I'll excuse it a little bit this time. But I think he might have been 17 incompletions in the game against SMU too, and then 17 incompletions against Texas this week. But I pointed this out on Twitter when I was having some conversations after the game with just some fans about where the program is at. And it started with a Wes Goodwin take, but somebody responded and said that Garrett Riley didn't have a great game either, which I kind of disagree with. I think Garrett Riley's scripted drives are pretty well designed. Almost every game, that first drive of the game, really good like play designs, and execution is just always up in the air, especially against Georgia. That in the first game, I thought the plays we called were actually really good. Just had a couple of drops and penalties that set you behind, and then you have to punt. So it doesn't really work out that way. But like I said, Wes Goodwin, I didn't know if this was just emotions from like watching the game happen, but I think Wes Goodwin has got to be gone for how poor the defense stopped the run all year. At least 3 of Clemson's 4 losses came in games where Clemson just couldn't stop the opposing run game. And the only one I didn't include in that is the South Carolina game. Even though Lenoris Sellers ran for 1,000 yards against us, it felt like, I thought it was mostly on like design passes, like scrambles. He wasn't just like gashing us running QB like draws and stuff. He was improvising, and that's why I didn't count it in that same vein. But the reason why Clemson used to be successful in the playoffs is because Clemson's defense could keep them in games like this when the offense is still performing well, but they're going up against a tough opponent. Clemson's defense usually kept them in these games, and there's big holes right now, and especially fitting gaps in the run game. I mean, it's no surprise that the game went how it did with that in mind.
Yeah, I agree pretty much on all points there. To your point about Garrett Riley and those scripted drives, my only 2 complaints really offensively from this game, I love that opening drive. Tigers go down the field, get 7 early, and the way you did it was just quick passes, and then you kind of got away from that the rest of the first quarter, and it worked well. And then the back-to-back goal line plays where you couldn't get it across on 3rd and 4th down. You just needed a yard, and I wasn't too fond of those 2 play calls right there. To your point on the defense, you had to see this coming. As good as Texas has been running the ball all season, Clemson gave up over 200 rushing yards to Stanford this year. It's just frustrating to watch. And prior to this game, I've seen a lot of people on Tiger Illustrated talking about how Wes Goodwin is gone, and that chatter has only increased. I expect Dabo to make that change. I don't know when. Wouldn't expect it this week with it being Christmas. That's not necessarily Dabo's style. Something has got to change because, to your point, even with the offense regressing over the last couple of years, the defense has been the only reason for a lot of Clemson's success because the defense has kept them in games. And then Saturday night, the defense was not doing that in the slightest.
Yeah, keeping Clemson out of the game, basically. And I do agree that might not be Dabo's style necessarily to fire somebody that he, put faith in and hired on the week of Christmas. But also, if you don't do it this week, you're only going to fall behind in recruiting a little bit more. Recruits are going to be wary of coming to Clemson, especially on the defensive side of the ball where we need help, because you don't know the future of that coordinator position. So I think there's no better time than the present. Might as well do it on Christmas Eve instead of Christmas Eve. Maybe it'll be done before this episode is even up.
Yeah, I think there's some definite changes that need to be made on the defensive side of the ball. One positive out of this, a lot of your playmakers, Clemson returns a lot of people next season. You have to be pleased with the improvement of Cade this season from last year. And portal pending, you got a lot of pieces of the puzzle returning back for next year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So far today, we're recording a little bit early, a little bit into Monday afternoon. I don't think there's been any transfer portal news other than the Troy Stellato and was it Sherrod Koval that declared before the playoff game. I don't think there's been any other updates.
Jackson Crosby announced on Twitter today that he is going to the portal as a graduate, but that's no offense, Jackson. He's a follower of ours, and he sits up in the Cajun Cafe with us at baseball season, but he did announce he's transferring.
Oh, what position does he play?
Receiver.
Okay.
I'm not even sure if he's a scholarship player, to be quite honest.
Oh, well, maybe he just had to go and clear room for Will Held from Purdue Clemson? I guess we haven't talked about yet. After Clemson bringing in their first 2 transfers from the transfer portal since our last recording of episodes. So, big changes already happening for the program.
Yeah, we didn't see that graphic they show every week with Dabo outside the locker room not letting transfers in. So that was refreshing to see.
One more thing. I forgot to put it in my notes, but my dad mentioned that there was rumors speculating that this might become a thing in this game. Adam Randall taking snaps at running back. I think we even talked about it on the episode last week because, he's got almost a Derrick Henry type build. It'd be like putting like DK Metcalf in at running back. I thought it actually worked out pretty well. He broke some tackles. He had pretty good ball carrier vision. If that's going to be the way to keep Adam Randall in Clemson another year, he's one of those players that I think might hit the portal. But if he's going to get more playing time at running back, then maybe that's something we should look into because I was impressed with what he brought to that.
Yeah, there was a lot of people speculating about that on Twitter prior to the game, and William Qualkenbush basically shut it down. He's like, there's no way that the staff's going to do this with just such short notice, but they did. And part of me wonders if his success, obviously he's a super athlete, is part of the success just Texas wasn't prepared for it, or is there something there? Dabo did say after the game that he will be moving to the running back room for next season. So could be a way to keep him on the team because he's a talented guy who's had some struggles, battled injuries, and has been replaced in the starting lineup with 2 freshmen. So if this is a way you can keep him on the team, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, I agree. And especially like him having just experience in the locker room, I'm sure he has some leadership there. Like kids are looking up to him or in behind him, like coming up younger than him. So I agree. I think if you give him a good offseason of learning running back and focusing on it a little bit, that'd be dangerous because he'll be a weapon as a receiver still too. You maybe motion just him out of the backfield, get him matched up on a linebacker in the slot, and we can tear defenses up maybe next year doing that.
Yeah, that first play he was in, I stood up. I was like, that's Adam Randall in a running back. My only complaint, they had him back returning kicks again this week. There are a couple. He should have just fair caught a couple of those because there were a few that we didn't make it to the 25-yard line. But other than that, really pleased with Adam Randall on Saturday.
Yeah, those were heat checks. After the SMU game, you got to let him have a couple.
Yeah.
Fact or fiction?
All right, no Twitter poll this week, but we're going to jump into fact or fiction. Fact or fiction, Dabo makes more than one coaching change this offseason.
I mean, we already kind of talked about it briefly, but I'm saying fact here. I think Wes Goodwin has got to be gone. It's just a failed experiment. I think he has a lot of promise and probably a good head for the game, but as far as like putting together game plans and stopping opponents, didn't see very much to be impressed with this year. I think it'd be a good move for Dabo to maybe look at bringing in a couple like senior analyst positions, just people from different backgrounds and get some different perspectives in the offense. Also, I think Wes Goodwin might be the linebacker coach, so maybe just getting a defensive coordinator and a separate linebacker coach. The linebackers, I think, is the biggest need for improvement this offseason. Like, I think the talent we have on the roster is fine, but developing that and actually fitting run gaps is going to be big.
Yeah. I'm gonna say fiction. I'm going to say Wes Goodwin is the only coaching change he makes. And I think Wes Goodwin's already got a job, if he wants it, in Norman, Oklahoma with Brent Venables as well.
Wasn't he about to go to Norman probably with Brent Venables, and Dabo offered him the coordinator position possibly to keep him in?
I don't know, but I would imagine that probably would be the case because he was Brent's guy. Fact or fiction, Clemson loses a key starter to the transfer portal this offseason.
If you would have asked me maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I would have said fact, but as of right now, I'm going to say fiction. Like we mentioned, it's like Monday afternoon, so things could change just before this episode even gets put out, but as of right now, it looks like the biggest portal losses are going to be to depth. Like, I'm worried about Adam Randall. Troy Stelato's already gone. Sherrod Koval already gone. I feel like those type of players, kind of like your juniors that might have gotten passed by a freshman this year, those are the guys I'd be a little more worried about. I feel like all the stars, you got like your Peter Woods, TJ Parker, all your receivers, Antonio Williams, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, Cade. I think all of those guys are good to stay. So I would be surprised if we lose one of those guys.
I'm going to say fiction as well. Outside of Andrew Makuba, who the Tigers faced Saturday, to my knowledge or my memory, I don't think Clemson's really lost anybody that's a key contributor to the portal. Clemson's been good at retaining their players typically.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head, and I mentioned this a bunch to my family when we were watching the Clemson-Texas game, that I think that Makuba transfer is a big tampering one. Like, when he announced that he was transferring, he dropped his name in the portal, and the day you were eligible to commit or sign, he was committed to Texas. I don't think he took a visit there or anything. It seemed like it was a foregone conclusion by the time he announced he was transferring that he was going to Texas already. I think I'd like an investigation on that, that recruitment.
Yeah, and as we've learned the last couple of years with NIL and transfer portal, there are rules, but the NCAA does not seem to enforce them.
It's kind of hard to be honest, because, I mean, how are you going to prove that without getting, like, the call logs and stuff? And I don't think the NCAA has, like, a law enforcement arm.
I think they like to think that they do in certain situations, but who knows? Fact or fiction, Clemson improved from a season ago.
Overall, I think this is a fact, but there are certain areas that I think Clemson did get worse in. Not necessarily, or I think linebacker play, you expected a jump just with Barrett Carter returning, and then you had Sammy Brown incoming, who obviously had a big come on late in the season. But just as I mentioned multiple times this episode, linebacker play this year was disappointing, to say the least. And I think overall as a team, won more games than last year, won a conference championship that you didn't do last year. But like, there's certain areas where Clemson did get worse.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely improved along the offensive line. As you mentioned, linebacking core did regress some this season. You still had 4 losses like you did a season ago, but you played 2 more games, including a college football playoff berth and a conference championship. So I think the Tigers definitely improved, especially on the offensive side of the ball this season. The regression on some of the positions on defense kind of falls back to Wes Goodwin, who, as you mentioned, is also responsible for linebackers.
Yeah, and I just real quick before we move on from fact or fiction, that reminded me of, like, with the question about staff moves this offseason, it does make me a little hesitant that Dabo might lean towards keeping the staff intact for next season just because of those improvements. Like, you won the conference this year, but I don't know, the issues on defense are very glaring. It'd be hard to overlook that heading into next season.
And Clemson fans are definitely not overlooking it, especially after Saturday's performance.
If Dabo wasn't thinking about it, he's definitely heard about it and has to be thinking about it now.
No, absolutely.
Weekly picks.
Time to review Pick'em from last episode, which was basically 2 weeks worth, the Army-Navy game and the first week of the bowl season and college football playoff. The way it shook out, Matthew gained 2 points off the 5 picks, moving him to a season record of 36 points. That also, in addition to 6 preseason picks from our first episode. I got 3 points over the last 2 weeks, bringing my total to 38, in addition to 6 preseason picks. So right now, I hadn't done the math with how many weeks we got left of this, but 2 point lead over Matthew heading into the kind of long stretch here.
Yeah, they're almost pulling away a little bit. It's not looking amazing for me. I might lose 2 in a row. And I still never did the punishment from last year, so I might have to do those in like the same weekend or something coming up soon.
Maybe we can just get a tattoo artist to come to whatever bar we do this at in Clemson and just do it while you're there.
That's not a bad idea.
So any of these you want to review? One I want to point out, I took over last week for SMU Penn State. The over-under was 53.5. There was a total of 48 points. I put this all on Jennings. I was expecting SMU to put up a few more points than they did there on the road at Penn State.
Yeah, that's fair. I thought that was going to be a good pick because I also picked that for my over. And the way it kind of worked out is after like the Army-Navy game and then I think Cal, UNLV, and I had Ohio, Jacksonville State. The rest of our picks were playoff games and the same. So once I got those 2 down, I knew I was going down this week. So got to turn it around coming up here, though. There's still some time left.
Still some time left. So Matthew and I are picking games from the day after Christmas, the 26th, through Saturday, the 28th, for this week's episode. Matthew, what are you going with for your favorite pick?
All right, I am going with Texas A&M as a 3.5 point favorite right now versus their bowl game against Southern Cal. This game A&M only opened as 1 point favorites and is moving towards Texas A&M more. I think just Texas A&M is a more talented team. They finished the season better than Southern Cal has. It'll be a good game, but I think Texas A&M wins by a touchdown.
Yeah, I like that pick. I considered that one. I'm going with a ACC-SEC matchup. Georgia Tech, a 3 point favorite against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt kind of had that early start to the season, knocking off Alabama, pushing Texas to just a 3 point game, but have gone on to finish 6-6 on the season. Georgia Tech has had some big wins down the stretch and a very competitive game in that rivalry game with Georgia. So I like Georgia Tech in this one.
I like that too. I think Vandy going 6-6 is above expectations for what I think most of us expected out of Vanderbilt this year. So I think it's still something to be proud of if you are them. But for my underdog, it's kind of rare. I don't think I've ever picked against Colorado in our pick'em contest. I'm usually kind of a homer for them, but they're playing BYU in a bowl game this week. BYU is a 4 point underdog. This is the last game of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, most likely, which might give Colorado a little bit more motivation, but I think BYU is a better team overall.
Yeah, I like that game. I might be picking it later in this contest. For my underdog, I'm going Iowa State's a 3 point dog to Miami. Iowa State, not the best showing their last time out. Miami, their last game falling to Syracuse, but Iowa State's a good little football team, and I like them in this game, especially with I hadn't heard anything about Miami. Miami just seems to have those types of players that you're going to see some opt-outs, that kind of thing. I've not heard anything. That's just the vibe I'm getting.
No, I agree with that, and I was considering that game for my underdog, but I like tried to look up if Cam Ward had opted out. Haven't seen any news specifically so far, so that'll be interesting, just depending on who ends up playing in that game. And then you already mentioned this game. This was your favorite, but I'm taking it for my over, Georgia Tech versus Vandy. I think Vandy actually has a decent defense, but Georgia Tech can score on offense. It opened at 54.5, and it's kind of getting lower. I like how it's moving, so I'm going to hit the over there.
The game I'm picking for my over is also 54.5, or I don't know what it opened at, but that's where it's at now. Game you already picked, BYU, Colorado. I know Colorado can put up some points with those two guys you mentioned, so expecting some points in this game.
Yeah, maybe, but I think BYU's defense, I haven't followed them much lately, but I think they have had a decent showing late in the season. And then my last one for under, Oklahoma taking on Navy in a bowl game, and I've considered picking this for my favorite, picking Oklahoma to win this game outright, just because I have faith in Brent Venables' defense and being able to stop the option. But Navy's coming off that huge win against Army where they just kind of blew out Army and scored a lot of points. So it'll be interesting. I don't know that Oklahoma's going to be able to score very much either, but I think it's going to be low.
I'm going with the Service Academy game as well. Louisiana Tech against Army. Repping the Army hat today on the pod. But over-under set at 43.5. You mentioned Army didn't put up too many points last week against Navy. I think this is a low-scoring affair, and I've learned my lesson against taking overs against Army. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up the show because we don't have a game to preview in either the next episode or one preview in the national championship. We can kind of do some Clemson off-season talk. There'll be more opportunity to talk about transfer portal and that kind of stuff. But anything before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I think just a little housekeeping for the listeners. I think I'm going to be doing a solo episode next week. As Drew mentioned, he's going to be in Nashville during our recording time. So probably just do a solo. I'll get his picks in and we can just run through what happened this past weekend or this upcoming weekend now in the bowl games. And I don't think we're going to get any playoff matchups, right? Or is there some playoff matchups Saturday?
There'll be one playoff game on New Year's Eve and 3 on New Year's Day. So
we'll get more of a preview of those. We won't have any to talk about, but yeah, that'll be nice that we'll be able to get some picks in for those playoff games. And yeah, looking forward to the end of the season. Kind of sucks that this is the way it ended for Clemson, but I think our mood going into the playoff game was that we were happy to be here. Didn't really earn this, Clemson stumbled into this position, put up a decent fight against Texas, so I think I'm happy with how the season ended.
Yeah, there's a lot of promise heading into next year, especially if Dabo makes the changes that many fans are hoping for, and then on top of all the guys you have coming back next year, combined with the improvement and growth you've seen from a lot of your offensive weapons this season. So I do want to point out, it just frustrates me how accurate Vegas is. Clemson's line against Texas opened at, I think, 11.5, and prior to the game time, it moved to 13.5. I was like, Clemson's going to keep this close. I took Clemson plus 13.5, and then would you know it, lose that one by half a point there in the game. So shout out to Vegas. I will say on my trip, first time ever went to a casino and left with more money than I went with. So was not a loser this week in the casino, just on my Clemson Texas bet.
I also had a casino trip, but I lost about $15. I was on our road trip back from Colorado. We stopped in Kansas City at a casino, and I've stayed at that casino before in Kansas City. It's actually pretty nice, and lost about $15, but I only put 50 or 60 in, so I can't be too mad.
Yeah, $15, not too bad. I walked away with a crisp $100 bill, so can't complain there. So Thank y'all for listening. And as Matthew mentioned, it's going to be a solo episode with him next week. So thank you for holding it down, Matthew. And we'll join us next week and talk some ball. Peace.
Peace and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.